Yeah, you can.
Okay, so I was 23 years old, and I received a letter in the mail, and it said, "We look forward to welcoming you to the Sericare Center for Cerebral Palsy." And when I was holding this piece of paper, I was at the same time thrilled, because I was really looking forward to moving to Shanghai, where the center was. And I'd been learning Mandarin, so I was actually quite good at it, better than my German currently. But I was also absolutely terrified, because I hadn't been trained, and nor had I ever worked with people, let alone children, with cerebral palsy. So fast forward about 2 months, and I find myself in Shanghai, in the center. Now, these kids were all orphans, and they ranged from the age of 3 until 18. And their cerebral palsy varied. So for example, there was 3-year-old Lu, who, when you looked at him, he looked like any 3-year-old boy. He was bubbly, he was joyful, there was nothing that you could see on him that was any different until he stood up. And he needed his walker because he had a bit of a drag in his feet, and that was it. And then on the other scale of the spectrum, there was 16-year-old Jiaolong. And Jiaolong had come from an orphanage up in Beijing, so he had, apparently, I'd been told, a little bit of English. But Jiaolong was about this tall at 16. And I was told that's the tallest he'd ever develop. And he was incredibly tense the entire time, which made his muscles sinewy and strong, unbelievably strong. And he was all hunched and bunched on himself, but at the same time, he had like these hands that were constantly in this sort of posture, if you can call it for hands, and his neck was at an impossible angle. His mouth was always open, which showed his imperfect teeth, and he always had a bit of drool going down his mouth because he couldn't control what was happening in his throat, on his tongue, with his voice. And so, of course, his speech wasn't very straight. It was quite garbled. It was very hard to understand what Jiaolong was saying. And I'm not proud to admit this, but when I was at the school, we were paired with different kids every day, or 1 or 2 kids, depending on how severe their cerebral palsy was. And every day I kind of thought, oh, please don't put me with Jiaolong. I won't be able to, I don't know how to handle that. I don't understand what he's saying. So how can I possibly help him? So there was a little part of me that just thought, put me with, Lu, for example. I can understand him. I'm not proud of that. Of course, one day, inevitably, the headmistress points me towards Jiaolong, and I sit next to him. My heart is beating probably as fast as it is today, and all along the rows of the tables, there were sheets of paper in front of the kids, and they had different shapes on them. There were hearts and circles and squares, rectangles, every shape, and we were meant to help the kids draw within the lines, color within the lines. And that was actually quite tricky, because a lot of these kids could not control their muscles very easily. So I sat down next to Jiaolong, and I picked up a bright yellow crayon and thought, okay, here we go, put it in his hand, and he dropped it immediately. And I thought, oh, of course, hold his hand, Fabienne, come on, you know this, he can't hold things properly. So I then tried again. I thought, okay, just gently hold it, because he's a 16-year-old boy, he does have his own identity, of course, so just be very gentle and just guide him towards the paper. And I gently tried again and held him, and he dropped it again. And he started becoming a little bit agitated and frustrated. And I was like, well, of course he's frustrated, he can't hold his pencil, and he's frustrated with me. And I then started to get into panic, thinking, okay, don't worry, we're gonna get this, it's gonna work out, it's fine. He then grabbed my arm, and I was blown away by the strength that his hand had on me, and his jet black eyes locked onto mine, and he started to try and say something to me. And he was imploring me with his eyes, and his knuckles were going white. My arm was losing sensation for the lack of blood going to it. I was desperately trying to understand him, but the sounds coming from his mouth, to me, were completely indescribable. And my mind then started to race, because he was imploring me. Drool was starting to go down his face quite strongly, and he was pulling me closer, and I felt his hot breath, and my brain just thought, what is this? Is it English? Is it Mandarin? Is he talking about the pencil? Is he talking about needing to go to the bathroom? Like, what do I need to do to help him? I was panicking. He was repeating the same thing, whatever it was, to me. And I tried to calm myself a little bit at that point. I thought, okay, well, if you panic, you're going to panic him more. The teachers are going to start panicking. Like, calm down. And as I calmed myself down a little bit, I understood he was actually repeating something to me. I could hear the same sounds again as he was just staring at me, trying to force me to understand. And then I thought I might understand what he was saying. So I thought I would take a bit of a leap of faith. And I went closer to him. And I said, "Doe, a deer, a female deer." And the biggest smile spread across his face. And he started crying tears of joy for being understood. This kid who is so rarely understood finally was able to speak English with someone. And it seemed like the longest, 3 minutes of my life to comprehend this boy. And then we sang the entire repertoire of The Sound of Music together. And luckily I knew all the songs, but what I hadn't grasped was this kid had understood. She speaks English. No one else, no one in the center spoke English. She does. She must know these songs. I must try and get this out to her somehow. And he didn't give up. And I'm glad he didn't give up, because I've never been so connected to someone ever in my life as I have with Jia Long in that moment. And I didn't care what anyone thought when we were just singing these songs from The Sound of Music together. And actually on that day, he taught me an invaluable lesson that I hold dear to me up until now, is that you don't always have to draw within the lines, because sometimes the most colorful moments happen outside of them.